Now that the close of our first decade is in sight, I think it would be appropriate to address the final election of the 1900s, that being the election of 1908, Taft versus Bryan. Now, Roosevelt, despite being well loved and eligible for a second run given his first stay in office was not full term, he had made a promise that he would not seek another term as president. He was able to convince his good friend Taft to seek the nomination, and with the help of Roosevelt, he won it. Bryan, who had run in 96 and 1900, won the nomination again for the Democratic Party. Much like the previous election, there was very little difference between the two candidates' promises. Bryan was part of the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party and had a hardline stance against the business elite and government by privilege, in which those elected to office won their positions not because of skill, but because of who they knew and who they were able to influence by their wealth. He also believed that the Electoral College was not reflective of the opinions of the American people and thought the election results should be based on popular vote alone. Essentially, Bryan was against big business and the wealthy having so much power and influence in the government. However, Taft agreed to also implement many of Bryan's reformist ideas as well as many of Roosevelt's progressive ideas. Taft ended up winning by a fairly large margin. Not only did Taft also promise many of the reforms and progressive ideas that the American middle class and lower class wanted, he did not express a hardline stance against big business like Bryan did. So while it was more or less a toss-up for the working class voters, wealthy business owners were more inclined to vote for Taft. Despite being in favor of an 8-hour workday and more workers' rights in general, Bryan did not gain the favor of the Labor Party and very obviously did not have much favor with the American businessmen. So who would have I voted for? Well, I have almost always been a very eat-the-rich kind of person, and Bryan's anti-big business and anti-wealthy elite meddling in the government stances really speak to me. While Taft was a friend of Roosevelt and had promised to implement many of the ideas I agree with, I just wouldn't have trusted him as much to put his words to action. Bryan, on the other hand, had shown a history of trying to work towards helping the working class. Additionally, Taft is an imperialist and the civilian governor of the Philippines for the early part of the 1900s, while I already know Bryan was in favor of liberation for the Philippines. I would have to disagree with my state, but Missouri only voted for Taft by a 0.09% margin, just a mere 629 votes. Bryan was truly the Bernie Sanders of his time, constantly running but too ahead of his time to win any elections. Now understand that throughout this entire decade of elections, I have portrayed Bryan as a great liberal and someone I would agree with on most things and vote for with full enthusiasm. However, I have only mentioned points that would have influenced me to vote for him over whoever he was running against. For every candidate in every election, there is a myriad of factors, both campaign-wise and otherwise, that influence people's vote one way or the other. Would I vote for Bryan today if he ran? Well, no. While I agree with him on many of his policies during his campaigns, Bryan was a creationist who argued against creationism being banned in the classroom during the Tennessee Scopes trial in the 1920s. He also was in favor of the Jim Crow policies throughout his entire political career. However, we need to keep in mind the time, that being the late 1900s and over 120 years ago. These policies and political ideas were being debated, but the debate had not become popular enough to be something one could campaign on without risking losing a lot of support. For example, nearly every white Democrat was in favor of Jim Crow until the 1920s and 30s, along with many white Republicans. During the 1900s, neither party was in favor of abolishing the system, as Democrats didn't want to lose support from the white Southerners, and Republicans thought their support from the black population was secure due to them appointing some black people to important political positions and supporting their freedom and right to vote during the Civil War and Reconstruction era. When it came to black people, generally speaking, neither party was particularly concerned with helping them and wouldn't be until the 30s.